There have been stories of fairies, elves, sprites, and pixies from different cultures all over the world. Scientists have always chalked up these stories to mere folklore, legends, and myths. But then they discovered the remains of small hominids that only stood about 3.5 feet tall and would only weigh an average of about 40 pounds. Could these so-called hobbits be the type of extinct hominid that all of the stories and legends were about?
There have been reports of strange creatures in the area.
Witnesses say they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
What is that? Welcome, beloved fofers, doubters, naysayers, non-believers, and skeptics. Welcome to Paranormal Fable or Fact. I am Victor Trevino, joined by my co-host and beautiful wife, Tammy.
We're your humble guides to tales of alleged hoaxes, unbelievable stories, and the overall strange.
Perfect. Gotta mention our email. It's pfableorfact@proton.me. Our Facebook and YouTube will be in the show notes. And if you like the show and you want to help the show out, best way to help us out is just subscribe. Subscribe to the channel, and it'll help us out.
Go on our Facebook and like us and follow.
Yeah, all that good stuff. And then I just wanted to mention, baby, from the last show, which was Robert the Doll, the reason the information is so limited, and, you know, we're guesstimating pretty much. We're just going by, because it's secondhand knowledge. The actual Otto family, you know, Eugene's parents and his aunts and all that stuff, they were quiet about it. In fact, we didn't even know he had siblings, remember?
Yeah.
The family kept it under wraps because they were very prominent. They were probably worried about their reputation. They didn't want to be, you know, going down to the local water hole and complaining about this haunted doll they had in their house.
Yeah.
So most of the information that we had in that show and other shows, you know, if other people have watched other shows on Robert the Doll, it's all secondhand knowledge. That's why it's all this guessing game, and people have to like poke and prod for information on it, because as far as the actual family was concerned, they were very, you know, quiet about what was actually going on.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because they, as prominent as they were, like there were numerous articles on his mom and his dad.
Yeah, they came out in the newspapers.
They were very, and then his mom was very artistic like he was, so there were newspaper articles, but nothing about the doll, nothing.
Back when the family was around, and I think that was because they were very influential, and probably, you know, hey, we don't want this, you know what I mean? They were very, I think they covered it up. They probably used their influence to try to cover it up so that it didn't get out, but eventually it did after they started to pass away and Eugene went off overseas and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's when everything kind of started coming to light. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that because I was talking to a friend of mine who listens to the show, and he was questioning me, well, why don't they just burn the doll? You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. Why wouldn't they trash it? Well, we don't know if they tried.
Yeah.
We don't know. I mean, would they say that? No, because that, again, they were trying to keep it under wraps. But just as a guess, baby, I think they tried to. I think they tried to burn it. I think they tried to throw Robert the Doll out. Or Robert the Doll was scaring them in their dreams. Remember Eugene's wife wanted it in the attic.
Yeah.
And she had dreams of Robert threatening her. Hey, if you don't let me back in the house, I'm going to hurt you and your family. You know what I mean? So maybe that was another reason they couldn't just throw the doll away or try to burn it, because, it threatened them. Hey, if you think that I'm bothering you now, you know what I mean? Try to hurt me and see what happens or something. I don't know.
And who knows if it threatened the other children, you know? Who knows?
Who knows? But, yeah, I don't want to go too deep in the rabbit hole, but I just wanted to put that out there. It's all secondhand knowledge. That's why it's very limited. But and I wish we had, one of them had written a book or something. That would have been awesome, because then we'd have better details, but we don't. So, moving on to the gist, baby. The show we're going to do is called The Hobbits, And the gist begins in 2003 on the Island of Flores in Indonesia in a cave called Liang Buao. The first specimens of small archaic hominids were discovered. I believe in the beginning they found like 5 of them. They were called Homo Florensiensis. We're not going to refer to them as Homo Florensiensis anymore, baby. From now on, heretofore, they are the hobbits.
Okay.
Much easier to say.
Yes.
So as of 2015, baby, a total of 15 partial skeletons have been discovered there, including a nearly complete skull named LB1. LB1 was actually one of the original findings. That's what got them all excited.
Oh, okay.
LB1 belonged to a female in her 30s, and she would have stood about 3.5 feet tall, which is right around 106 centimeters. They nicknamed her Flo, for the Island of Flores.
Yeah.
And this was pretty much the largest scientific discovery of our time, baby. But it was almost lost. If you've ever listened to or watched any documentaries or any shows on giants, it's one of the things that always pops up. There's all these scientists and archaeologists from back when who have been complaining for decades, saying that, these newspaper, because they'll dig up these newspaper articles of these digs where they bring giant bones into academia and they vanish. They call it Smithsonian Gate. So this kind of borders up to that because but it was almost lost, baby. We almost didn't know the hobbits existed. It almost fell victim to what people have said the giant bones fell victim to. There was only a difference in there, and we'll go, like I said, into more detail, but we almost didn't know that these hominids existed. So let's move on. These remains, very important to know, baby. They were not fossils. They were actual remains. So it's just insane.
And can you explain a little bit about between the fossils and remains?
The minerals inside whatever the organic material is gets replaced by silica. And that's what causes it, or other minerals like that. And so basically it turns to stone. I don't know what the process is. It's like it's like temperature, pressure, moisture, all this other stuff is needed to change bone or a leaf or wood, slowly turn it into, like petrified wood. Petrified wood is a fossil.
Right.
It's wood that's basically stone now.
Yeah.
Because of this fossilization process. I thought you needed millions and millions of years to create fossils. You don't. Fossils can be formed in as short as just a few days.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that. There's processes that they could do. They can actually fake fossils now. I didn't know that, but if you look it up, it's true. But anyway, the remains is something that died, and there's its bones after all the flesh rots away, right? You get these bones.
Yeah.
And we'll take a look at a picture here. If you can look at the hobbit next to the human skull here, you can see that's bone.
Yeah.
It's dirty, old, ancient bone next to a nicely dermested, beetled, cleaned human skull.
Oh, yeah.
The bones were extremely brittle when they were first found. They were this consistency of wet paper. So they had to fully expose the bone and allow it to completely dry out before they could be excavated, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
But that's basically the difference between, right there you can see, that's stone compared to the skull that we looked at with the Hobbit.
Exactly.
That's a fossilized skull.
Right.
So it's basically just stone. We're looking at a video of the Island of Flores, very Hawaii-esque, crystal waters, the green rolling hills. This gives you an idea of where Flores Island is in Indonesia. Pretty much at the southern end of it, but right smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
There's an aerial view of it.
North of Australia.
Yeah, very green, beautiful waters. It's just a gorgeous island. It really is. It's a drone. Going over white sand beaches, the whole 9 yards, So let's move on to... still part of the gist, the most serious questions that need to be answered about the hobbits, and this is right off the Smithsonian's website, baby. Which hominid species created the 1 million-year-old stone tools found on Flores? Because right now, the remains are dated to between 60,000 years and 90,000 years ago. And we'll talk about it later, there's a controversy on that because it's magical how they just slowly got older and older once it upset the apple cart on the cute little migratory chart,
Right.
of evolution, where they say we all have migrated out into this chart, and it violated that. It completely just threw a wrench in that. So then they kept dating the bones, and it kept getting older and older and older, and now magically it fits right into their little chart. Oh, right when humans were first getting to Flores, the hobbits were going extinct. Wow! Isn't that magical? Isn't that fantastic? Very suspect, very suspicious. But, whatever.
So they fixed the tire on the cart.
Yeah, they piled all the apples back in there. The cart's been fixed. But they found tools that are over 1 million years old on that island, baby. Small tools. So if the hobbits died out 90,000 years ago, who created those tiny stone tools from 1 million years ago?
Yeah.
And it cannot be possible, baby, for these hobbits to be 1 million years old. Oh, no, that would really upset their evolutionary chart.
Right.
Their fancy, cute...
Is it easier
You know which one I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
There you go. There's a picture of it where you got the monkey and it slowly evolves into a walking, upright human. Yeah.
Is it easier to date the tools than it is the skeletons?
I didn't, and one day I will.
Go into that?
One day I will go into how they date things now, because I think they use radiation now or something. But all of their dating processes on old stuff is very inaccurate. You'll hear the scientists complaining about it all the time. It's not as accurate as they would like it to be. But it gives them a window, and that's why you get this date like, they're from between 60,000 and 90,000 years old, because that's that margin of error.
Okay, because I thought it was more accurate. So you're saying it's not. Okay.
No. Especially when it comes to like metals and stuff like that, it's very hard to date those. Well, we talked about that a little bit when we did the Sword and the Stone, remember?
Yes.
So, moving on, I don't want to go too deep in the rabbit hole on that, but moving on, the second question that needs to be answered, how did the hobbits manage to get to the Island of Flores? And they have what's called the raft theory, baby, that they probably just threw a raft together, but people don't realize, baby, building a raft to us seems pretty,
simple.
Not a big deal, but we have rope.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We have axes. We have chainsaws.
Yeah,
Do you see what I'm saying? We have tape measures. Right. We have things to strip the bark off. We have tools to do all that stuff. When you're talking about building a raft from scratch, what are you going to bind it with?
Yeah.
Because you have to bind all those. If you're going to make a log raft, let's say.
Right.
What are you going to bind it with?
Right.
They don't have twine.
Yeah.
These 90,000 years ago, they weren't running around with rope.
Yeah.
A nylon rope. So, is it fibers and natural fibers? Well, did they have the technology to know to use those fibers,
right?
Or to maybe even have to braid natural fibers in order to have it strong enough to hold the raft together?
Yeah.
Then you have to think about seaward knowledge. You're not just going to build a raft and push it off and sail off into the nice blue horizon, baby. You have to know where you're going.
Yeah.
You're going to have to know how to navigate, how to row, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So when it talks about the raft theory, it's not just something, to us it might seem plausible, but, basically these things were like little apes. Between us and a chimpanzee is where their intelligence fell.
Yeah.
So they were a little smarter than chimpanzees, but not as smart as us.
Yeah.
So could they figure that out? It would be like letting kids try to build a raft.
Right.
Would they know how to do it? I don't think they would.
Yeah, like letting a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old build a raft.
Yeah, and then do they have the strength to build a raft?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. How are they going to harvest the wood?
Yeah.
Because you'd have to need pretty big wood to stay afloat on the ocean. Plus there's trial and error. There's all kinds of sophistication when it comes to something as simple as building a raft. That's why it's up for debate, and that's why it's just a theory.
Yeah.
But what it boils down to is they really have no idea how Homo Florensiensis got to the Island of Flores.
Okay.
And we'll go into that more later. The third question that needs to be answered, did the hobbits have language, make art, or have any other forms of cultural expression? Because they didn't find any cave drawings, baby. They didn't find any pottery, anything like that. So they had decently sophisticated tools,
right?
But they didn't find any kind of art or any kind of weavings or drawings or paintings or, petroglyphs, nothing like that.
Right.
So They don't know. That's what's curious about them. The fourth question that needs to be answered: did the hobbits and our species, Homo sapiens, ever come into contact with each other? Because remember, the dating process isn't accurate, baby. So even though they're pretty, the consensus, quote unquote, of academia says 60 to 90,000 years. How accurate is that?
Yeah.
We don't know. And I told you at the beginning, they started off 12,000 years old.
Right.
But that just can't be because, well, that doesn't fit into our chart. So magically the age just moved out, and we'll go into that more.
Okay.
I know I keep alluding to it because it irritates me,
Yeah.
but number 5, was a volcanic eruption on Flores the reason the hobbits went extinct? Because there's volcanoes all over that region, baby.
Yeah.
So those are calderas. Those are basically dormant volcano. That's a dormant volcano filled with water, basically. That's what a caldera is.
Okay.
Gorgeous.
Yeah, very gorgeous. That
This
water.
this is a YouTuber that basically traveled to the Island of Flores and filmed it all. But I borrowed some of his footage because it just shows how, look at that. It looks like Hawaii, baby.
Yeah.
I mean, you got the palm trees, the rolling green hills, the
Thick
crystal
forest,
waters.
huh?
Very thick forest. It's jungle.
Lots of places to hide if you were 3 foot tall.
Yeah, I believe right there, if you're looking at those trees right along the tree line, those are mangroves. So they've got kind of swampy areas. They've got, look at all those bats. They've got bats flying off trees, and he's filming them. And just, it's jungly, it's tropical, it's warm, it's gorgeous. Again, very Hawaii-esque. But, yeah, look at that. There's like tourism there, hiking trails, snorkeling, all kinds of stuff. I mean, his video is like... And that's another thing I wanted to show you, the Komodo dragons, baby. And we'll get into that in the red flags, because I think that's fascinating. That there was, because Komodo Island's only like 40 miles away, and there are, and were back then, Komodo dragons on the island of Flores.
Okay.
So, we're moving on to the last question. How similar is the DNA of hobbits compared to the DNA of other human species? Because so far, no DNA has been able to be retrieved from the bones of any individual hobbit. Because remember, I told you they were very brittle, very fragile, and it was something about, like, they think that the heat of the drill, when they were trying to carefully, microscopically drill a little hole in the bone to extract some marrow and try to get some DNA, they think maybe the heat that it generated damaged the DNA, so they couldn't extract it.
Oh, wow.
And now they're hesitant to do anything else.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to damage the bones. They're not fossils.
They'll have to wait.
Right.
Okay.
So let's move on to the red flags. When the remains were discovered, it was a joint excavation site. I think this is very important because of what we're going to talk about later. There were scientists from Indonesia, which, was their home country, but there were also European scientists there. And then there was a whole team, which made up the majority of the people there, from Australia. They were Australian scientists. And the reason they were there, baby, they were looking for evidence of the original human migration of modern humans from Asia to Australia. Because remember, they're looking for evidence for that cute little chart.
Oh, okay.
The evolutionary chart.
Okay, that explains. That makes
So
sense.
then they find these hobbits smacking them in the face. Pow, 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 No. Chart's wrong. Apple cart gets upset. Oh, they're running around with their hair on fire. People are panicking. Oh, what's going on here? So, of course, in comes all of the naysayers, right? Because it can't possibly be anything to upset our chart. Our chart, we've already come to a consensus. It's perfect. Small tools. We already kind of talked about this, about the questions. Small tools were found, but they were consistent with the size of the hobbits, of these fossils or the remains that they were finding. Just to show you the scope.
Oh, wow, it's big.
Yeah, that's Liang Bua, the cave.
Oh, wow.
I think they had to dig like 20 meters down. That's where they found the remains, baby. And there you can see those are bones. Those aren't fossils.
What's 20 meters?
It's about right around 55 feet, something like that. Wow. 60 feet. It's about, a little over 50 feet. It just gives you the general scope. And this was from the show The Unexplained with William Shatner, baby, this video. I borrowed it and I gave credit to the History Channel because that's what this was on. You see how tiny the skull is in his hands?
His hand.
Yeah, it's like a little child's skull.
Yeah.
They only weighed an average of 40 pounds, baby.
Oh, goodness.
I mean, they were tiny.
Yeah, they were.
The males probably would have been closer to 50 pounds, but a thin individual would have been only like 35 to 40 pounds, baby. I mean, they're tiny. You're looking at like the size of a 4 or 5-year-old.
Yeah. Wow, look how detailed they are.
Oh yeah, they got to be really careful because again, the bones were very fragile. By the time modern humans arrived in the area, it is believed the hobbits had already gone extinct. And this is what I'm talking about, baby. When the bones were first dated, they were 12,000 years old. Then they were retested. They were 18,000 years old. Then they were retested. They were 50,000 years old. No, I'm sorry, they were 33,000 years old. Then they were retested. They were 50,000 years old. Then they were 60,000 years old. Then they were 90,000 years old. And it jumped all the way up to 150,000 years old. And now it's kind of moved back. Like I said, the consensus says between 60 and 90,000 years old. And again, it perfectly matches with that cute migratory chart that they're so proud of.
Right.
Magically. I don't know, baby. Maybe I'm completely just going off on a branch here, and maybe I, talking out my butt, but I think it's, if you don't think that's suspicious, to at least make you stroke your chin and go,
Yeah.
how magical the age just kind of progressively got older to match the time frame.
Very much older too.
Yes.
Not like
right.
Not like 1,000 years. Like
right.
Like almost 100 times more.
Just imagine
crazy.
the difference between being 12,000 years ago and 60,000 years ago. How many generations is
Yeah,
that?
it's a
But
lot.
then remember, baby, they have stone tools from that area that are over 1 million years old.
Wow.
So what are we talking about?
Right.
If you don't understand that this is a cover, and then again, we'll go into the big cover-up in the red flags here in a bit, but if that isn't enough to make you scratch your head and go, at least give you a little bit of, you get your suspicious bones going, I don't know what will.
Yeah.
And this is another thing we just talked about. The Island of Flores, this is the next red flag, is an oceanic island. That means it has never touched a mainland. Other islands in the area were part of like a land strip, like a peninsula that came out in that area. I can't remember what it was called. I didn't look it up, but a lot of the other islands were. They were part of a mainland strip that connected to the bottom of where, like, India is in what would that be? Like the Korean Peninsula and stuff like that? I can't think of the map now, but anyway. Yeah, I think Indonesia is right off the coast of anyway, it doesn't matter. But there was a land bridge that connected them to a mainland.
Okay.
Some of the other islands in the area, but Flores wasn't one of them. That's where the raft theory comes in. Okay. How did they get to the island?
Yeah.
Did they just pop out of the earth? They certainly didn't fly there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So they have no idea how they got there.
Interesting.
The next red flag, and this is the trip, baby, because there were prehistoric and extinct giant storks, and I told you about the Komodo dragons.
Right.
Pygmy elephants that were called stegodons running around this island. Oh. So there were like these prehistoric small elephants and animals on the island with these little hobbits. Now, Komodo dragons are massive to us, baby.
Yeah.
But imagine if we were only 3.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
They would be absolute monsters. In fact, they probably preyed on the hobbits.
Yeah.
The Komodo dragons, if the opportunity arose. I'm sure it would. Why not?
Yeah.
It's not like they're, big enough to kill it. So you would have to have probably like a group of them together to try to
kill one.
Right. And we were talking about Willow when those demon dogs came into the
dogs.
and then they all grab their spears and they're stabbing at it and they're all fighting it. That's what it would be like.
Yeah, I definitely believe that.
Just some pictures here.
Oh, yeah.
You can see the giant prehistoric rats, because there was prehistoric rats that are extinct now. They were the size of rabbits. Now, a rabbit-sized animal could feed a human, but if you're only 3.5 feet tall, it could feed 2 or 3 humans, you know? And that's the size comparison to what a Komodo dragon would be when you're that small, baby.
Wow,
Yeah, it would be something that you would have to worry about.
Yeah.
And then here's another picture I found. They're all trying to be quiet as the Komodo dragon goes by. Like he's like, shh,
Oh, yeah.
These are pictures I found. They're like AI generated photos, and it shows 3 little hobbits, and they're crouched behind this bush, and there's like a giant Komodo dragon looking around, and one of them's like putting up his fingers to his lips, like, be quiet as it goes by. And that's what it would have been like back then. They would have been, the Komodo dragons would have been the apex predators on the island.
Yeah.
I think they still are, besides humans. So, moving on. But I just thought that was fascinating, because they would have had to compete with these storks.
Right.
Over scavenged.
Right.
Things.
Yeah, because how tall did you say the storks were?
They're over 4 feet tall.
Oh, yeah, and the hobbits are under that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Birds that are bigger than you, imagine.
Yeah, wow.
It's likely that the hobbit, this is the next red flag, it's likely that the hobbits had to have some kind of a rudimentary form of language, perhaps similar to how chimpanzees communicate, with hoots and whistles and growls and body language and stuff like this. Evidence suggests they had relatively advanced cognitive abilities and were capable of using tools which would have required some form of communication. I didn't understand what that sentence meant, but they're talking about, once you make a tool, it's handed down generation to generation, and it's improved over the course of generations, right? Well, in order to teach someone how to build a cutting tool, there would have to be some form of communication there.
Yeah.
Hey, come here, son. This is how you make a knife. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This is how you make a knife that you can skin animals with, or this is how you build a fire. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There would have had to have been some kind of form of communication. Not necessarily words, but, some rudimentary kind of language.
Right.
Now we're going into the description of hobbits, and we're going to watch a movie here, because we're going to look at the actual hobbits. This is the renditions, wax statues, I believe, that they built. You can see the size comparison between the skulls.
Yeah. That's
Flo on the left. I think that's supposed to be Flo.
Okay.
Yeah. And most of the weights and the heights on the hobbits are guesstimations. And we'll go into why, because they found leg bones, and the only pelvis bone that they found were smashed. And it goes back to what I was talking about, how they were almost lost. And so let's move on so we can get to that. Brain size and structure is the next red flag. While looking at these skulls and the partial skulls that they have, their brains were much smaller than modern humans, baby, because even not only just is the skull smaller, but the actual skull capacity is much smaller. If you shrunk down a human skull, it still wouldn't look like a hobbit skull, because the actual skull's volume is much smaller than a human's.
Oh, okay.
And to a point to where they were trying to say they had microcephaly, which is like a disease where, it's called microcephaly.
Yeah.
You can see there the child on the left's head's much smaller than the child's on the right, because it's suffering from microcephaly.
Right.
That's basically what the hobbit skulls look like. They were, the back of the skull should have been a lot bigger, and it's not. Yeah. And that's where the whole scandal came in, that they might be, just sick humans, right, that had some kind of disease that stunted their growth, not hobbits, because I was fascinated to find out, baby. To this day, there is a small percentage of scientists in academia that completely just dismiss the idea of hobbits. They're not hobbits, they say. They're just people that are sick and it stunted their growth, and they insist on it.
Oh, interesting.
Hobbit deniers.
Hobbit deniers, yeah.
We'll call them.
Yeah. They do not believe.
Nope, they don't believe. So even though their brains were smaller than modern humans, it was still larger than chimpanzees, like I said. So they're somewhere between us and a chimpanzee intelligence-wise. Uh-huh. They had large temporal lobes, which is associated with speech and hearing, and highly folded frontal lobes, which is associated with higher cognition. So they were more aware logically.
Uh-huh. Can I ask a question? Were the tools that they found, were they for gathering, hunting? I mean...
There was thousands of tools found, different varieties.
Oh, different varieties.
Some of them were fragmented, of course. Yeah, digging tools, skinning tools, hunting tools.
Oh, so they were hunters.
Yeah, things that would have been like little tiny spears, maybe arrows, stuff like that. They found all kinds of tools.
Chimpanzee doesn't do that.
No, chimpanzees don't make knives.
No.
Right. And again, that goes back to the sophistication of the raft.
Right.
If they're sophisticated to make cutting tools or skinning tools, we don't know if they were able to build fire, though, for example. And again, they didn't paint like other hominids did.
Right.
So that's why I'm kind of suspicious about them not being able to extract DNA from the bones, baby, because what if they aren't like other hominids? What if they don't have, share our gene pool like other primates do?
Right.
Because they're weird. They're different. They're odd.
Yeah.
They're completely small. Their heads are different.
Creature.
Completely different species.
Yeah.
They don't express. That's one of the questions. Did they express art? Did they have music? Did they sing? Did they, play instruments? Did they? Because there's no artistic expression like as seen with other prehistoric hominids of their age, because they're dated right around the time of Neanderthals and Homo erectus.
Yeah.
So, and Homo erectus and Neanderthals had tools and weapons and stuff, and they had cave paintings and everything else. So why don't the hobbits? Very strange, very odd. So,
or they're hiding it.
But I don't see why they would want to.
Yeah, I don't think they would want to.
Because they're just odd. The hobbits are odd, baby.
Yeah.
So, you got to kind of put on your tinfoil hat when you're, I understand I'm being very conspiratorial, but it just seems weird to me that they can't extract DNA magically, you know? And we'll go into that in a little bit here. Now, here is the next red flag, baby, and this was my research. Scientists do not have a definitive single cause for the short stature observed in modern human populations, which are referred to as pygmies. There are still pygmy populations all over the world, baby. In fact, there are pygmy populations in Indonesia. And we're going to, again, I keep saying it, but we're going to talk about it in a little bit here. They can't explain why modern humans are small. Okay?
Yeah.
And this is while being able to take blood samples, do autopsies after they pass away for medical research. And they can't explain why they're short. So you're going to try to tell us why the hobbits were so short when all you have to look at is fragile bones?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
From tens of thousands of years ago?
For modern, they can't even explain
it. They can't explain it, but yet they're going to explain the hobbits? It's ridiculous. And here's what they say. In summary, while there is strong evidence for genetic basis related to growth hormone regulation, the exact causes and influencing factors for the pygmy phenotype remain an active area of research. That's the big, long, fancy way of saying we have no idea.
Okay.
That's the scientific answer.
Yeah.
So scientific answer.
Okay, go ahead.
Layman's answer, they have no idea.
Yeah.
Or they have theories of what it is, they have no idea. So here's where we're going to get into the controversy, baby. This is the next red flag. In early December 2004, a little over a year after the initial discovery, a paleoanthropologist named Teku Jacob removed the specimens from the repository in Jakarta's National Research Center of Archaeology. Professor Jacob did not believe the specimens represented a separate species, contending that LB1 was from a 25 to 30-year-old omnivorous subspecies of Homo sapien, probably a pygmy, and that the skull was small due to microcephaly. So the Hobbit denier, which produces a small brain and skull. He kept the specimens for 3 months. Now, I couldn't find it anywhere, baby. But when this first happened, I remember reading all kinds of magazines, National Geographic, Time magazine, and they talked about this anthropologist, this scientist, Jacob. He didn't just show up and say, "Oh, all right, everybody out." They showed up with armed military. It was the Indonesian authorities.
So he showed up with the government.
Right, because he was working for the government at the time. But he didn't have command over troops, baby.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean? I think probably what happened, and I look it up now and they're like, yeah, they talked to the director of the National Research Center and asked him, and he gave him permission to remove the specimens. Well, yeah, when you're looking at an automatic weapon pointed in your face, yeah, you're going to say, oh, go ahead. Yeah, here it is. Here's the keys. Go ahead and get it. Yeah. Help yourself, But they make it like, it was they were all nice about it. They stormtrooped into this place, baby.
Yeah.
And even after the 3 months, they shut the site down for 2 years and didn't allow the scientists back into the excavation site until 2007.
So they kicked out all those scientists that did all that hard work.
All that hard work and tried to seize the specimens.
Wow.
But you can't find that now. If you look now, it's all been watered down, and they're pretty much blaming Jacob, like he went in their one-man show, and just smacked all the scientists around and kicked them out with his own boot.
Right.
No, that's not what happened.
Right.
And I think they kind of made Jacobs the fall guy, because after he passed away in 2007, that's when they released and allowed the scientists to come back to the site. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, after Jacobs did this and seized all of the specimens, his actions were immediately criticized by the rest of the scientific community because they feared that important scientific evidence, again, this is a scientist's argument, this is a scientist's answer.
Yeah.
They feared that important scientific evidence would be sequestered by a small group of scientists who neither allowed access by other scientists nor published their own research. In other words, the findings would be hidden. They would be squashed.
Right.
All of the evidence would be, they were putting a lid on it. They were covering it up.
Yeah, they were trying to cover it up.
But of course, scientists just can't say that. I don't know why, but they can't just say that, hey, you're trying to cover up evidence.
Because they're part of the cover-up, too, on other stuff.
On other stuff, possibly, yes. But basically, what had happened, and again, you can't find this anywhere, baby, but I remember when this originally happened, because I was glued to this story back then, back in like 2004, 2005, when this stuff was happening.
Yeah.
What the scientists had done at the excavation site in the cave, what they had done is they had taken moldings. They had made rubber molds out of the bones.
Okay.
And then had plaster casts made, and they sent those plaster casts all over the world.
Oh, wow.
To leading scientists all over the world, paleontologists, paleoanthropologists, archaeologists, all over the world, so that then they released their findings to the public. So here comes the government trying to cover it up. It's too late.
Yeah, it is.
The copies had already been sent out, so everything that Jacob was insisting, they're just sick hominids. They're just the subspecies of human that was sick. And something's, they were suffering from microcephaly, and something stunted their growth. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. And all these other scientists that are looking at these plaster casts going, no. No, this is these are not. This is a separate species. And that's why they ran into so much backlash. And that's the only reason the specimens were returned, baby. If that had not happened, everything would have disappeared.
Yeah, nobody would know about it.
Yeah, it would be one of those stories that you see in the newspapers.
Folklore.
Just that we'd be talking about, but I have the National Geographic that talks about the hobbits. Oh, yeah, but that site was, they said that it was just all fake, and they were just
then
sick
it'd be
human.
in the National Enquirer instead of the National.
You'd see everything that matches the exact pattern that you see when you talk about the giant bones.
Right.
It's amazing, baby. But fortunately, we didn't lose it.
Yeah.
Now, here's where we get into even more of the controversy, because they weren't done, baby. They have to cover stuff up. You're not going to upset the apple cart.
Right.
Remember.
Right.
You have to support the cute chart, the evolutionary chart that they insist.
You have to believe in they.
Right. You have to believe what they want you to believe.
Yes.
When the specimens were eventually returned, they were severely damaged. In fact, 2 of the leg bones were missing. Damage to LB1 was long, deep cuts marking the lower edge of the hobbit's jaw on both sides, and it was said to be caused by a knife that was used to cut away the rubber mold. We just talked about how they made the rubber molds. So the excuse was, you did it, because Jacob denied any wrongdoing.
When you guys were making the cast,
he blamed them and said, no, you did it because you cut the rubber mold away and you damaged the jaw. We didn't do it.
Right.
But let's move on. The chin of the second hobbit's jaw, and this isn't LB1, this is another hobbit's jaw, was actually broken in 2 and hastily glued back together again. So they had to reattach it at a proper angle because it wasn't glued correctly. Further damaging that jawbone.
Right. Because we also have to remember that these bones, when they first found them, they were like wet paper. So they were
very
fragile. In a fragile state when they were found.
Worst of all, the biggest crime committed, though, baby, was the only complete pelvis of the hobbits that they found was completely smashed. In fact, when we were watching that video, you could see it laying on the table. The pelvis is in 2 pieces.
Yeah.
All the intricate bones in the middle where the tailbone is and everything, they were all smashed to bits.
Yeah, and that's important to know how they stood, how they walked, right?
The body shape, the gait, the evolutionary history of where it would have placed them on an evolutionary chart. So why are you surprised
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
that the pelvic bone was smashed?
Yeah.
Because the hobbits don't fit into that cute little chart.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about the migratory chart now, I'm talking about the evolutionary chart. They don't
Right.
fit in there.
Right.
So, of course, what would explain how bipedal they were, how upright they were, how erect they were compared to humans, that's found in the pelvic bone. So, of course, it's going to be smashed to bits.
Yeah.
It has to be.
Yeah.
In fact, what else has to do with how they walk and stuff? Leg bones. And
Right.
2 of the leg bones were missing.
We're missing. Yep. Yep.
Magical, isn't it?
Yeah.
Suspicious?
I wouldn't call it magical. It's suspicious.
Suspicious much?
Very suspicious.
So are we really putting on tinfoil hats, or is there something going on here? It was an attempt at a cover-up, baby. That's just all there is to it. So let's move on. Again, we talked about Jacob. He denied any wrongdoing, and he said that, hey, when we got the samples, they were already damaged. Don't blame us. In 2005, this is just a month after, because remember, he took them for 3 months.
Right.
So while he had the specimens, Jacob, just like a month after that, Indonesian officials forbade any access to the cave, but allowed the scientists to return in 2007. We already talked about this, shortly after Jacob's death. Oh, so Jacob died. Okay, now you're welcome back in.
Come on back. Come
Now
on
I
back
have a
with us.
question for you, baby. And
Yes.
again, you got to put on the tinfoil hat. I realize that. This is
Okay.
going way out on a limb.
Okay.
But if they shut the site down from late 2004, / early 2005,
Right.
the scientists were not allowed to go back in there.
Right.
And they didn't open the site back up until 2007, almost 2 years later.
Yeah.
What is to stop them from going in there with heavy equipment,
Right. And contaminating it.
completely digging out everything in that cave,
Right.
backfilling it, compressing it down, getting
Yeah.
correct compaction, and then saying, "Okay, right this way, scientists. Now you're welcome back into the cave." What is to stop them from doing that?
Nothing. Nothing.
So, again, I know that's
Yeah.
a stretch, but because you don't hear about the hobbits anymore, baby. We haven't had any, headline-breaking discoveries from the Island of Flores since. And hardly anybody talks about them anymore. I think it's highly suspicious. So is it so far-fetched? Are we really being conspiratorial when we talk about there possibly being a cover-up? I don't think we are.
No, I don't think so either.
So let's move on to inarguable truths.
Okay.
Inarguable truth number 1, there have never been any other cases of insular dwarfism to this degree before.
Number 2, it was the Indonesian government authorities that shut down the site and confiscated the remains.
Number 3, within the scientific community there are still debates about where the hobbits fit into human evolution.
Number 4, the hobbits were basically hairy people who were very small.
Number 5, public interest in the hobbits was shattered by the quote-unquote headlines.
Number 6, there have been sightings of creatures matching the exact descriptions of the hobbits in the area for many years.
Okay, so let's go back to inarguable truth number 1, which is there have never been any other cases of insular dwarfism to this degree before. Insular dwarfism, it's proven in the animal kingdom, and they say that it applies to humans as well. But there's not really any evidence of that. We already talked about the pygmies, baby, that they don't know why they're small. It
Right.
doesn't have anything to do with insular dwarfism as you see in animals because, like we said before, those little tiny elephants that were on the Island of Flores back then, called stegodons, they're extinct now, but they were there at the time. That's insular dwarfism. Because they didn't have large predators, they didn't have to get so big.
Oh, okay.
Right? They didn't
That
have to
makes
contend
sense.
with
Yeah.
tigers.
Yeah.
The Komodo dragons aren't as big as a lion.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like an African elephant has to be.
Yeah.
So that's why they say that they don't. And plus the diet and everything else, they might not have as big of a diet as they need. So they don't get to that large size. That's what insular dwarfism is
Okay.
when it comes to animals. In humans, there's never been a case that comes anywhere near the hobbits. Because modern day pygmies, average height is about 4'11" tall, which is about 149 centimeters. That's the average, with the females being slightly shorter than that on average. Like 4'9", 4'10", right around there.
Yeah.
But the hobbits were only 3.5 feet tall, baby. Over a foot shorter, and they only weighed about 40 pounds, which is only 18 kilograms.
Yeah.
So basically what the argument is, well, they're just small because of insular dwarfism. No. There's no evidence ever, anywhere, before the hobbits of insular dwarfism to that degree. So that was one of the arguments of why they were so small. Got completely blown out of the water. Because again, they can't even tell us why pygmies are small.
Right.
So I
Right.
think we covered that.
Yeah.
I think we covered that one enough. Let's move on. Inarguable truth number 2, it was the Indonesian government authorities that shut down the site and confiscated the remains. We already talked about this, but let's cover it in more detail, shall we?
Okay.
I looked up the laws, baby. And everywhere I did my research, there was always one sentence that stuck out. And it was worded similarly. But basically, that any fossils at that site belonged to the state. They were properties of the state. In other words, and that's not unique to Indonesia, any fossils that are found in a country belongs to that country.
Yeah.
In other words, if Russian scientists came over here and dug up a brand new fossil, and they're not just going to take it home and start displaying it in the Russian museum. No, the American government's going to say, no.
That's ours.
That's our fossil.
Yeah.
It stays here.
Yeah.
The Russian scientists will get credit for it.
Yeah.
And vice versa. If Americans did that in Russia, same thing. Russian government's like, oh, no. That fossil's ours.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, but the point is only the government had the authority to confiscate those specimens, not
Jacob.
Mr. Jacob. Yes, if he was a representative of the government, that's fine. If he was the figurehead, that's fine. But it was not him. It wasn't his authority that did it, is what I'm saying. It was the government trying to do it. Because there's people out there that are like, well, governments don't try to hide stuff. They don't try to cover stuff up. That's just people being anarchist, No, governments try to cover stuff up all the time. Mm-hmm. This is a perfect example of that. In fact, I went into even more detail with the laws. There's a worldwide, and this applies again to almost every country out there. It's called national sovereignty and control when it comes to dig sites, excavations, all that kind of stuff. Governments may place restrictions on archaeological sites within their borders to assert national sovereignty and control the research and preservation of cultural heritage. Here in America, you have those Native American burial grounds.
Right.
Not allowed to dig there.
Right.
It's in Hawaii. There's cultural sites that, hey, you can't dig, you can't do anything over there. No mining, none of that stuff.
Alaska.
All over the world.
Yeah.
And the governments have the legal right to do that because you're preserving your culture.
Right.
But again, that authority falls to the government, not some head of some department in some scientific government office. It's the actual government, and they blamed it on Jacob. He's the fall guy.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was an accident that they opened up the site after he died. It just further, threw him under the bus.
Well, they always have to have a fall guy.
Right.
They always have to have a fall guy.
They, with a capital T. Now here's because you could argue, well, no, because Jacob was he was some head of a department, like I said, in some kind of branch of the government. Yes. If you're going to argue that it was him and he did have the authority, fine. But if he did, then the government did nothing to stop him when he was abusing his power, right? When he went in there and snatched up the specimen, he shouldn't have been doing that.
Yeah, no
because
disciplinary, nothing.
No, because remember, it was a multinational dig site. It wasn't just Indonesians, and even though they had the authority to do that, the way he did it with armed guards, baby, he shouldn't have been doing that. So
if he was in charge, then that means the government aided him.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So they either used him as a fall guy, but if you're going to argue, no, he wasn't the fall guy, he actually had the authority, well, then they didn't do anything to stop him. Mm-hmm. So either way, they're complicit in this, is what is my point. Mm-hmm. And then, after he returned the specimens, Jacob, the government still shut the site down.
Yeah.
So who's really calling the shots here, Jacob or the government? Mm-hmm. The government is.
Yeah.
And that's what the inarguable truth is. It was the Indonesian government authorities that did it, not Jacob. So moving on to inarguable truth number 3, within the scientific community, this is going to be a short one, there are debates about where the hobbits fit into human evolution, still to this day. And we already kind of talked about this already, where they don't fit on that evolutionary chart. They're not on there.
Yeah.
There's no slot for them. Mm-hmm. I think probably they're working on something now. You probably look now, and you might see them in there. I doubt it.
Yeah.
Because, again, remember, there's a lot of scientists out there denying their existence.
Yeah.
No, they're not hobbits. They're just sick people. So, you might have been tripping out on inarguable truth number 4, baby. Moving on, where it's just the hobbits were basically hairy people who were very small. There's a reason for that. Because all of the attacks against their authenticity fall under diseases, etc., pathogens, all this kind of stuff. And these are just some of them. These are the major ones. The first one is congenital disorder. Small brain size led some to believe they were normal, but with just a deep birth defect. This was widely rejected because if you're talking about a birth defect, baby, how do you get an entire tribe of 15 individuals that are suffering from the same birth defect?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense. It got shot down. The next explanation, microcephaly. We already talked about this. This is what Jacob believed.
Yeah.
With the small skulls and the small brain sizes.
Mm-hmm.
It was argued that the hobbits were normal humans, but they suffered from a pathogen. The frontal and temporal lobes in the brain were too well developed, and also after a pathological analysis of LB1's skull revealed no pathologies or evidence of microcephaly, it was concluded that LB1 is a separate species of hominid. So in other words, if the hobbits were suffering from microcephaly, there'd be damage to the brain. They couldn't find any evidence of that. Microcephaly's off the table.
Okay.
So yet another excuse shot down.
Yeah.
Lauren syndrome. Lauren syndrome is evident in that's hard to say, in inbreeding populations. So populations that are highly inbred.
Yeah.
It causes a shortened stature. Okay, that matches. A smaller head. That matches. Mm-hmm. The endocranial volume of the hobbits is much smaller than anything exhibited in Lauren's syndrome, however. So they have patients that suffer from the syndrome nowhere near to the degree of the hobbits. Do you see what I'm saying? Much smaller than anything that shows from inbreeding.
Yeah.
So, but in order to prove it yay or nay with absolution, a DNA analysis would have to be done to prove this theory. We already talked about the DNA thing.
They can't do.
But, so Lauren's syndrome's still out there. That argument's still open, but pretty much no, because it doesn't match up with the hobbits.
Right.
So most likely, no, Lauren's syndrome doesn't match. Here's the next one. Congenital iodine deficiency syndrome. This is a result of an underactive thyroid. This can result in a form of dwarfism that is still found in the local population of Indonesia, which is fascinating, right?
Yeah.
But several studies of the pituitary area of the skull and bones in the hobbits found no evidence of congenital iodine deficiency syndrome, so it was shot down immediately. No evidence that they're suffering from this syndrome. Moving on, the last one, and this is a big one, Down syndrome. Some deniers claim that LB1 suffered from Down syndrome, and that other remains of the other individuals at the Flores site were merely normal modern hominids. However, there are a number of characteristics shared by both LB1 and LB6, as well as other known early humans, and absent in actual humans, such as the lack of a chin. So in other words, there were characteristics of individual hobbits. If you had one that's suffering from Down syndrome, well, then why do the other hobbits have the same characteristics? Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, okay.
So, again, you have to have a whole tribe of Down syndrome people, which wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what they're saying. In 2016, a comparative study concluded that LB1 did not exhibit a sufficient number of Down syndrome characteristics to support the diagnosis. So Down syndrome shot down as well.
Yeah.
So I go back to the inarguable truth. They were basically just hairy people that were really small. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
You know, they're not sick. They didn't suffer from any diseases. Sick. None of that stuff.
Yeah.
They're just a weird form of hominid. So let's move on to inarguable truth number 5. We're getting to the finish line, baby.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Public interest in the hobbits was shattered by the quote-unquote headlines. We talked about when Jacob seized the specimens. When he first did that, baby, I remember all the headlines. Oh, the hobbits were found to be fake. Oh, the hobbits, it's a mistake. Oh, they're not hobbits. It was wrong. You know, they were just normal hominids with the disease. They got the headlines they wanted, just like the debunkers always do.
Yeah.
And I believe it damaged the popularity of the hobbits.
Right.
It killed that big, huge headline that was worldwide and everybody was talking about it. It just squashed that.
Yeah.
And that's what the point was. I believe that's the only reason he went in there and seized all of the specimens. Well, I think his initial plan was to hide them and make them disappear, but even if they didn't, public interest was shattered.
Yeah.
Period. After those headlines came out that they were just sick hominids, normal hominids, with some kind of pathogen that stunted their growth.
Yeah.
It's inarguable. That's what happened.
Yeah, so they just did a bunch of fake news to make you think it wasn't a big discovery.
Right, because I believe a lot of people now, probably in high schools and stuff, they're not even learning about the hobbits.
Yeah.
They're just teaching them the cute little evolutionary chart, and they're not even talking about the hobbits.
Yeah.
I bet you if you have a high school student at home, ask them if their science teachers are talking about this. I would be fascinated to find out if I'm wrong.
Yeah.
But I highly doubt they are.
Yeah, I
because
don't think
that's
they are.
not... They don't want to upset the apple cart. It has to roll with their meme, with their whole narrative.
Yeah.
So that's what that inarguable truth is for, and I believe it is inarguable.
Yeah, they will make us believe what they want us to believe.
Right. So let's move on to inarguable truth number 6. There have been sightings of... This is the mic drop. There have been sightings of creatures matching the exact descriptions of hobbits in the area for many years. I did a Google search, Bibby. Mm-hmm. And anybody can do this. In fact, if you're on your computer listening to the show right now, I welcome you to do this. Take the time to do it. Just type in, are the hobbits of Flores Island extinct? Just type that into your Google search and you will be amazed at what it says. It'll say something along the lines of, well, they're generally considered extinct. Not definitively. Why? Because there's a lot of people in the scientific community, baby. These aren't cryptozoologists. These aren't pseudoscientists. These are members of the scientific community that believe all of the sightings of the Orang Pendeks. I mean, you got the Albatwitch, you got the Pugwudgie. These are small, hairy hominids that have been sighted all over the world for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
In fact, some tribes in Indonesia have a creation story where they talk about these small, hairy hominids that are the cause of why humans are even in the area of Indonesia. It's their creation belief, it's their religion.
Okay.
So where did they get those stories? And the scientists are saying, well, if they're talking about them from thousands and thousands of years ago, and they talk about them having something to do with humans even getting there, how old are the hobbits? And then, basically what I'm saying, baby, is just imagine our buddies, the Hicks.
Yeah.
And if they're listening right now, they know who I'm talking about. Let's say in West Virginia forests, people keep seeing this 8-foot-tall flightless bird, right? We talked about this with Sasquatch, if it was a flightless bird. Let's just say they've been seeing it for hundreds of years, right? People in West Virginia, they keep seeing this weird bird, they keep finding these weird tracks, they keep hearing these weird bird calls for hundreds and hundreds of years. Scientists are going over there, no, there's no evidence of a flightless bird in this area. Then they dig up the remains of this flightless bird.
Right.
And it's only 12,000 years old.
Yeah.
Oh, but then 18,000 years old. Oh, then 30,000 years old. Oh, and then 50,000, whatever. Yeah. But they find remains in that area.
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Yeah.
You would be smacked right in the face. Well, this is what's going on in Indonesia. And the biggest argument, baby, about the Orang Pendek not being the hobbits? Mm-hmm. Well, Sumatra's 1,800 miles away. How could they possibly get from Flores to Sumatra? Moron. You can't even tell us how they got to Flores in the first place. You're going to argue that they can't get to Sumatra?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Really? Here's a lollipop. Go over there. Don't hurt yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
What are we really talking about here?
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
What kind of argument is that? Oh, it's 1,800 miles away. That's too far for them to go. You don't even know how they got to Flores.
Right.
How do you know they aren't on Sumatra?
Yeah.
1,800 miles isn't that far when you're talking about tens of thousands of years of migration.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Come on now. And you did some research on the Orang Pendek.
Yes.
And let's talk about that now because that goes along with this inarguable truth.
Okay, so I have a description of them. They're 2 feet to 5 feet. They have a mane around the face.
Like a lion mane, right?
Yeah, like a lion mane.
Yeah.
The hands and feet are like humans, except the middle finger is extended. Mm-hmm. Okay, and their heels are pointed.
So the tracks they find, the heels are pointed.
Yeah, the heels are pointed.
Okay.
Okay, and then the farmers that see them will see them. They're terrified of them. Like they're like the boogeyman. Mm. You know what I mean? Like they're afraid that they'll bring bad spirits to their crops. They also don't have a cleft on their upper lip.
Oh wow. And
there's stories that they walk with their feet backwards sometimes to, I guess, for the tracks or something. So there's a couple like folklore. One is that they won't come out in a photograph unless they want to.
That's convenient.
Yes. And then there's this strange folklore that there's only two, one female, one male, and they live on the opposite sides of the island and do not meet up until one is dying. Then they mate, and the new baby becomes the next single female or male.
Oh, wow.
Which is odd.
Yes.
Now,
That's just folklore, though.
the Dutch tried to find these creatures, or these humans, in the 1920s, but they said that they only came up with sun bears. So they always thought it was just sun bears that they saw.
Mm-hmm. Very convenient. See, the playbook never
Kind of like
changes.
how they say Bigfoot. They always say, "Oh, you just saw a bear."
Okay, yeah, because the playbook never changes.
No, it doesn't.
It's all the same explanations. You just saw a bear, you just saw a coyote with mange, etc.
Escaped.
Yeah,
monkey.
escaped animals from the zoo, of course.
Oh,
yeah.
my least favorite.
Yeah, it's debunking, baby.
101.
And how do we know that they didn't develop the longer finger that you're talking about?
Right.
Or maybe it's a different species of hobbit.
Yeah.
To
who's
say that that's, the mane around the face, we don't know if the hobbits had a mane around the face.
Who's to say?
Right. We don't know if they had a mane around the face.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about here? So in conclusion, baby, what do you think about the hobbits?
Well, I was very surprised. Like, I've never heard about this Hobbits and that in 2004. I had no idea.
Really?
Yeah, I had no idea. So that was interesting because it was during my lifetime.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting. Very. I think they're different. I think they're their own species or different creatures. I don't know.
So you don't think they're humans, sick humans?
I don't know. No, I don't think so. Do you?
No.
Yeah, I don't think they're humans. I think they're their own creatures. Okay.
And I already kind of explained it. I think I think there's something very odd about them.
Oh, there's definitely something.
I think it's not surprising that they don't have wall art like other hominids. I don't think it's surprising that they magically can extract DNA from these bones. I think it's not so far-fetched that they tried to cover them up, that a government stormed in there and seized all the specimens. I think even the people that are for them, yes, they are a separate species, for science's sake, because remember, it upsets the apple cart. I think even they have reservations on what they actually are, because they're completely different from any other prehistoric hominid out there, baby.
Yeah.
So that about does it, baby.
Yeah, that does it. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Go on our YouTube and subscribe. Go to our Facebook and like and follow. Subscribe, yes. That's how you can support us and keep us going. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Good night.
Good night, everybody.